I'm really excited to be here with Nancy and with Cindy and Kristen to meet some new friends.
Well, one of the reasons I was so excited that we were going to be able to host you guys was that you're such good friends. And so generally our idea is that we pair two books together that really aren't in the same genre, don't have a lot to do with each other. And so many times that means we end up with authors who don't really know each other. Works out great. We have a lot of fun, but I thought this will be really fun because even though they're both contemporary fiction, they are, very different stories, but there's some overlap, but also you guys are such good friends. So I think that'll be really entertaining to learn more about that and see you guys interact together. So do you want to start out by just telling us how you got to know each other, and then make sure you include your nickname, please?
I'll let Nancy start with that story.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So Julie and I have been friends for a long time. We certainly coordinate everything down to our outfits.
Yeah.
So the blazer that I'm wearing and that she's wearing are the ones from our book jackets. Like, I don't know if you can see my book jacket photo. So we're like totally matching our books.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Somewhere.
There's Julie. And so we met years ago. I can't even remember how many years ago now, at a writing conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when we met, initially, I remember hearing Julie read from an excerpt of her book, and I was very taken with it. And I just heard her speak several times at this conference, and I went up to her and introduced myself because I heard her mention that she was a journalist or had worked as a journalist, and then I had been a journalist too. So we had that in common. And then after that, we didn't really talk much to each other after that. It was just like, quick hello. And then months later, we were in a writing workshop together, along with a lot of other people, but we were able to see each other's writing. I think we were in different writing groups. Everything was grouped. And so I would sneak into the room where she was and where you could see her writing, and was so impressed with it. And apparently she was doing the very same thing. So it was like surreptitiously, we were checking on each other's work. And that's really how we became friends. And we just started talking a bit on the phone, and it went from there. And we have just been in lockstep this entire way. I wrote about our journey and our friendship in Real Simple magazine, February issue of Real Simple. It's called Friendship in Black and White. And I talk about us having this cross-racial friendship, and which kind of connects with my book, where I talk about a cross-racial friendship as well. But anyway, we've just been so close and been with each other for everything from the writing and the revising to querying literary agents to getting our book deals, that her family knows when I call, because I call all the time. And so they know, they're like, oh, it's Nancy again. They're probably sick of me. And so her husband, Sean, decided that we talked so much that we needed a couple name. And so the couple name is Juicy. Get it? A combo, a mashup of our names, Julie and Nancy. So Juicy. Anything else you want to add to that, Julie?
No, that about sums it up. But I did like your comment the other day when someone was commenting on our nickname of Juicy, that it's not spelled like the word juicy with an I, because Nancy said, because she and I are a team. And so there's no I in Juicy, which I love.
Juicy.
So I saw that on Twitter this morning, actually, and I was laughing. No I and Juicy.
Yes, it's fun. Yeah, it's been such a gift to me, and I think to Nancy as well, having someone walking this journey with us, because we're both debut authors. We were both kind of floundering. We didn't know what we were doing. We were revising our work, and at different points sharing our work with each other, and giving each other advice on our query letters, or how we were positioning ourselves, or the comp titles for our books. And it was such a it's been such a joy, because not only is Nancy a good friend, but she's also somebody that's great to bounce ideas off of. And I feel like we pulled each other along this journey. There were times when I was pulling Nancy forward, and times where she was pulling me, and we've had rejections and disappointments. And I feel like I can trust her completely with all of my highs and my lows. Sometimes it's really easy to share your excitement and your joys, but having a friend who will be sad with you if you're sad about something, in equal measure that they would be happy for you, is such a it's just such a gift. And I feel really, really lucky.
Yeah. And then there was this writing conference that Julie went to every year, the Muse in the Marketplace, run by Grub Street. And so Julie's been a part of that community for a number of years. And so I just got into it in more recent years when Julie pulled me in. But I remember one, I think it was on a Saturday morning, Julie called me. This was before I started going. And she said, one thing, Julie's always enthusiastic and always has an idea and a plan. And that's what I love. One of the things I love about her. And I remember her saying, Nancy, I've got this cool opportunity to sit next to this editor from a big publishing house at this luncheon. Do you mind if I mention your book? And I'm like, duh, of course. No, I don't mind if you mention my book to this big time editor. And so she did more than that. I found out later that not only did she mention my book to this editor, but that she spent the entire or most of the lunch hour talking up my book. And later on, when I reached out to that editor, just to say, oh, I'd love to send you my manuscript at some point, she commented that she had never met another writer like that, like Julie, who had spent so much time talking about and promoting another writer's work. And so that really speaks to who Julie is, and and to the friendship that we've developed. And I'm just so grateful to be with her on the journey.
I love that. And I do think you're right that it's hard. The journey is such a long process. And the fact that you all have truly done it lockstep to the fact that your books have come out a month apart from each other is truly just amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And the thing is, initially, our books were supposed to come out on the same date. Well, my date kept getting changed a lot, actually. But at one point in time, my book was supposed to come out on January 12th, the same day as Julie's book. And so when we found it out, we were like, oh my God, we're going to have twins. Like, this is going to be great. Our book babies coming out at the same time. But that was short-lived because eventually my publishing date got moved to February. And so at first we were a little disappointed, but then we were just talking about it here recently, that it was kind of nice that we were publishing in 2 separate months and that we could kind of just celebrate the other person, and that there was no competition of, oh, our books are coming out in the same month. Are we on the same list for our books coming out in January? And those kinds of things. So it all worked out where we could just fully support each other.
Well, I agree with that. And so you each could just take the month, like Julie's book came out in January and you were wonderful on Twitter and elsewhere, talking all about it, and then vice versa when your book came out, Nancy. So it is nice to see that. And what a great relationship. I have just absolutely loved watching the two of you all interact with each other. It really is a neat thing. Well, why don't we tell everybody a little bit about your books? Julie, do you want to start? You can talk about Waiting for the Night Song.
Sure. So Waiting for the Night Song, it's set in New Hampshire. I'm also, in addition to being a writer, I own and operate a small organic farm in New Hampshire. And so the backdrop of this novel is really my favorite place in the world, which is the mountains of New Hampshire. So the story is about friendship, secrets, and betrayal, and it's set against the backdrop of a slowly and quietly changing climate in New Hampshire, in a small town. And I tell the story in a dual timeline. So my main character's name is Katie Kessler, and we hear the story from her as an 11-year-old and from her as an adult in her late 30s. And so as an adult, Katie's an entomologist, and she's studying this specific beetle, which has moved into New Hampshire. And she's trying to prove that the beetle has arrived in New Hampshire and is posing a threat of forest fires because it's killing off trees. But no one believes her, and she's battling a climate denialist government to do this research. So when we first meet her, she's at this point in her career that's really important to her, and she wants to prove that she's right and save the forest and be the hero. But from her childhood timeline, there was a mystery. There's a traumatic event from her childhood that is literally unearthed at the exact moment in time when she's trying to achieve this great event in her career. So she's faced with the deepest, darkest secret of her past and the biggest challenge of her present at the same time. So she has to wrestle with, a lot of questions of, morality and ethics about when is doing the right thing. Sometimes it's not the right thing to do, and weighing relationships versus her career, and trying to protect this planet that we all share, and trying to convince people of her opinion. So there's a lot of my love of nature and trees and the mountains of New Hampshire, and relationships. There's also the main relationship is a female friendship, which, as you can tell, I value very much, as in my relationship with Nancy. But so it's centered on a friendship, but at the heart, I think it's also a story about our environment.
Well, and I thought it was particularly relevant to us as we just, originally had you all scheduled for February 17th, and then Houston was hit by a climate changing storm. So I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. We look forward to talking with Julie more about the climate change issues, since we then had to postpone to today because we were hit by that very thing.
Yeah, and one of the central points in the story is that in this little town, the temperature has gone up 4 degrees over the past century, and that's a real number in parts of New Hampshire where I am, and it's resulted in a 22-day increase in the growing season in the agricultural area, which is a 3 weeks longer growing season, which is a lot. And so that whole story started because I wanted to explore all the different quiet ways a 4 degree change over a century would change a community and the people in it. So it's kind of a slow burning climate change, not a giant, it wasn't an ice storm. It wasn't a single event, but it was like a slow burn event, which I kind of like that slow burning aspect in a mystery.
Me too. So, all right, Nancy, how about you with The Kindest Lie?
Yeah, The Kindest Lie is a story of family, sacrifice, love, all of it at the start of the Obama era. And the book centers on a woman named Ruth Tuttle. She's this very successful Ivy League educated Black engineer in Chicago, definitely on the come up. So many things are going her way. She and her husband have just bought their new townhome. They, she's got this husband who's just wonderful, that he'd be the great person to have a family with, and he's pressuring her to start a family. He's like, it's time to start a family, but she can't do it because she's been keeping this big secret. And the secret is that she had a baby when she was just 17 years old, and she walked away from her son, and she left her baby in the dying Indiana factory town where she grew up. So she decides to go back there to search for her son, and when she gets there, nothing is the same. She finds that her grandmother and her brother have been keeping secrets of their own. So a lot of things are different. And then she meets and forms this unlikely friendship with a poor young white boy nicknamed Midnight. And the two of them, when they come together, they are just on this collision course of race and class that change both of their lives forever. And not just their lives, but it has all these ripple effects on the lives of the people that they've grown to care about.
Well, and I thought your story was also very relevant in light of the last year and, Black Lives Matter protests and everything that's happening with that, but also with the way the economy has been impacted by COVID. And you're talking about going back to the town, and the economy is totally different. And so I just thought it was a glimpse into a time that, started a little while ago, but certainly very much feels like now also.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so many people have thought that I wrote this book during the last 4 years,
Right.
but I certainly didn't. And it was just uncanny, the parallels between the two. And, in 2008, we were seeing the rise of what some were looking at as a political savior in Barack Obama. Now you're seeing some and many looking to that same thing with the election of Biden and Harris. And then there's the historic nature, too, of both of those periods politically, with the first Black president and now the first Black and South Asian vice president. And then, like you said, the economy, we were going through the Great Recession then, and now people are losing their livelihoods again. And I think when you have that kind of economic strain, it just exacerbates some of the racial tensions. And, and so many people were saying we were in a post-racial era back then in 2008, but I knew we weren't. We had a Black president, but that didn't mean that we were beyond racism in America. And then when you look at where we were last year with the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, you see that, none of this has really changed, and that we have a lot of work still to do in America.
Well, that was actually the sad part of the book for me was, I mean, I know you already knew this, and I'm sure in some level I did, but reading it after we went through all of this stuff made me realize that, yes, we are nowhere near a post-racial era, and that there's so much still to be done. But it just was kind of sad too, but such an enlightening read and just beautiful, beautiful book. Both of them are. So do you want to start out, Nancy, and talk a little bit about where you got the idea for it and how you got started and kind of that whole process?
Sure. So like I said, I wrote this years ago. Actually, it was in the second term of Obama's when I wrote it. But I like to write about the things that obsess me, that keep me up at night, that I'm consumed by. And I was definitely consumed by the events of 2008, partly because we had elected our first Black president, and that was historic. But also on a personal nature, it was a poignant time for me because my father was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer that year. And he was definitely interested in seeing a change in the country. And I recall when he was in the hospital in October of 2008, and the doctors were trying to see how lucid he was. And so, they ask you, what's the day of the week? What month are we in? And the doctor asked him, who's the president of the United States? And mind you, this was October. And in this croaky voice, he said, Barack Obama. And the doctor's like, not yet, not yet. And, and so, I was really interested in him voting early, which he did, because he was bedridden by election day. And so, as I always say, he's someone who survived World War II and the Great Depression and Jim Crow, and he cast the last vote of his life for America's first Black president. So it was a bittersweet time for me, but also feeling like he died at a point of hope in the country. And I think that hope was palpable for so many, not only Black America, but I think no matter what your political persuasion was or your race, a lot of people felt that we had transcended a barrier, which we had. But at the same time, I saw all of this divide, this vitriol between Black and white. It was playing out in my social media feed. And then just throughout the Obama presidency, I saw it. And I saw some in white America saying, you don't really see us and our struggles and what we're going through. And so I was interested in that divide. And that's what inspired me to write this story. And so I thought of who are the characters who can inhabit this world and bring this to life. And that's how I came up with Ruth and Midnight to tell the story.
Well, how about you, Julie? How did you get started?
So my story, as I said, it was a dual timeline story, and it really started with this image of these little girls picking blueberries in a boat. That's because I live on a lake and I have 4 kids, and I would take them blueberry picking all the time. And it was just a very big part of our lives when the kids were little. And they started asking if we were stealing the blueberries, because we would just pick them off wide open pieces of land. And when they started asking if, whose berries are they, I started making up these rules for why it was okay to take these berries. And I would say, well, if we don't take them all, just take a handful, it's fine. And, we're not getting out of the boat, we're not trespassing. And I quickly realized I was making up rules to justify behavior that isn't really justifiable. So I quickly backtracked on that. But that idea got in my head about the way we justify behavior. And so in the book, I don't think this is giving away anything important to the book, but there's 2 little girls, Katie, the main character, and her best friend, Daniela, that they go blueberry picking on a boat, and they're stealing blueberries, and they make up these rules that they call the poacher's code. And I tried to push these little girls to a point of, swearing a blood oath, how kids would, back in the day would cut their thumbs and press them together and swear a blood sister's oath and swear an allegiance to these false rules. And then something traumatic happens and they use these rules to shield themselves from responsibility. So that was the central idea of the story. But the environmental aspect of it grew because when Katie and Daniela return home as adults and have to face up to this traumatic incident they covered up as children, I wanted the world to be different. And so I was thinking, what would be different decades later returning? And as I was writing this book, I was also building a farm. So I was in the dirt literally every day, looking at this land that was different than it was decades ago. And so this idea started percolating about how agriculture has changed and the forests have changed. So I'd started doing a lot of forestry research. And it's true, like the iconic maple trees in New Hampshire that we see on all the postcards that you associate with New England in the fall are moving north, at a slow pace, but the bottom edge of the map where you see them it's moving up into Canada because temperatures are rising. And there may be a day, maybe in my lifetime, when New Hampshire is not the home of the sugar maple anymore. And so that idea just set in me how much land can change and how tied people are to the land they come from. So I kept going back to this little girl, Katie. And as a child in the past storyline, she's almost like this half feral child. She's running free in the woods and picking berries and climbing rocks and drinking lake water. And she's just this wild child who feels very connected to nature. And as an adult, she's lost a tiny bit of that wonder, but she just desperately wants it back. So as an adult, she's trying to track down this beetle. And I came to that beetle because it's a real beetle. It's called the mountain pine bark beetle that we've seen it in California and Colorado. And I believe it's in parts of Texas now, that it moves in and it kills off pine forests. and it leaves them, it's kindling during a drought. So when the fire starts, it burns fiercely. And that's what we've seen so much of in the last, 5 to 10 years. So I took that beetle, and with some fictional license, I invited it to New Hampshire. It does not exist in New Hampshire. It very well might someday, but I wanted to take that scenario and put it in a place where it doesn't already exist, so that my character would have to fight to prove something, that she knows this beetle's there. She knows it's posing a risk. And then I put her head to head against an unnamed administration that I'd go into no details about, that has cut off federal land from environmental research. And I came to that part of the story because as I was doing my research in the beetle, I got really engaged with entomology Twitter. There's a lot of people out there on Twitter that love to talk about insects, and I just went deep down that hole. I was very excited about all these insects and all these. I mean, I could write like 10 books, each one focused on a different insect. It's amazing. But so when I started doing this research and found out that there are scientists out there who've been doing environmental research projects, that over the past couple years, federal land had been closed off and the research was stopped. And that's research that will never be regained. Like even if it picks up this year, there will be a couple years gap in these studies that have been going on for decades. And it's such a loss that we'll never regain. So I wanted to put my character, Katie, like front and center, like fighting this battle, not only to prove this little tiny insect is here, but proving that we need access and we need, transparency and sharing research and, open access to, because we're all inhabiting the same planet and we're just one species on this planet. So there was a lot of my farm in there, a lot of my love of the soil and the sugar maples and my obsession with insects. And it all kind of came together into a story that didn't start out as a story about the environment. But as soon as I put my character in that place, the trees just started talking and they wanted to be a big part of the story. And so they are.
Well, the thing that I loved that I learned when you and I spoke for the podcast was that I said the blueberries always make me think of Blueberries for Sal. And then you said you had actually used that book a little bit as your framework for your story, which I just thought was the coolest thing.
I did. That is one of my all-time favorite books in the world. My childhood copy of it, I'm sorry about that. My childhood copy of it is so worn out that I took the pages apart and framed them in my kitchen, the end pages from Blueberries for Sal. But the story is about a young girl who goes blueberry picking, gets distracted, makes some bad decisions. She encounters a bear. She rethinks her decisions, makes some better choices, and ultimately finds her way home. And that could also be the plot of Waiting for the Night Song. And the bear in that story plays a really important part and very close to my heart, even though it's a small part in the actual book. But the threat of a bear is always in that story. When the girls meet, the very first time they meet, Katie thinks Danielle is a bear in the woods, in the very beginning of the story. So there's that there's a whimsical nature to it, but there's also this part about being a child free in nature, running around in the woods and encountering birds and plants and a bear in the wild, which just captured my imagination as a child and clearly still has my imagination.
Well, I loved that. So, well, why don't we talk a little bit about research? Nancy, do you want to talk about what you did in the way of research and something maybe that surprised you that you came across that you didn't know or that you incorporated that you weren't planning to initially?
Yeah, I mean, for mine, excuse me, I didn't do a lot of research initially when I first wrote the story, but then I realized I had to go back and dig into the adoption piece because in my book, it's really about a woman making peace with her past, and she goes back to her hometown to search for the child she walked away from, and she doesn't have any information about where her child is. And her grandmother, excuse me, sorry, her grandmother and her brother have been keeping all of this information from her, and so they don't reveal anything, and so she has nothing to go on. It's not like she's got any records or any papers that she's signed or anything. And so I really had to figure out what are the steps that she would go through when she goes back to search for her son. Where would she possibly meet a dead end? And then once she figures out some things that are related to adoption, how would she find those records? What would those records look like? And so I asked around, and then a writer friend of mine knew an adoption attorney. And so I talked with her several times during the course of the writing of the book. And she's based in Indiana, which is where the book is based. And so that I found was really important too, because the adoption laws were very different in Indiana versus in other states. And so that was the main research that I did was talking with her. I think a lot of the other aspects of it were just from my own imagination or from my experiences, and I didn't have to do a lot of research. Some people have asked me in interviews about writing a white boy character, Midnight, and how much, did I have to really research and to go into that. And I did talk with some parents, like I'm not a parent, but I did talk to some kids actually, that I like, usually the children of other writers or people I would meet at workshops and writer meetings, and just kind of ask them, okay, so what kinds of things do you like to do, or what games do you play, and those kinds of things. But of course, they're not always forthcoming about everything, and so I did talk to some parents, particularly some moms, and I think I even asked Julie some questions at one point about her son Everett. When he was the age of my character, when he was 11. And so I was just able to pick up bits and pieces of some of the weird, crazy things that kids do and the mischievous things they do. But in terms of really researching this character and him being white, that was not something that I had to do a lot of. It was less of the things that a boy might do. But for me, I've never been white and never been a boy, but I have been 11 years old. And so I was able to just draw upon my own experiences, particularly my experiences of having been bullied as a child. And from that, I knew what Midnight felt like. He's really a kid who is on the outside of things. His father has lost his job. His grandmother is really raising him right now, but she's consumed with, the bills and trying to keep the shop she owns afloat and taking care of everybody in the family. So in many ways, he runs the streets of this small town on his own and is standing on the outside of things. And so even though I didn't have the same life experience that he did in terms of that kind of a background, I still knew what it was like to stand on the outside of things. And I infused Midnight with that. And so the research in that piece was really looking within and dealing with things that maybe I hadn't even dealt with from childhood and bringing that to the character.
Well, and the other thing I thought was interesting when you're talking about the adoption piece is with respect to Ruth, she was thinking about the adoption only as she can from her own perspective. But I think as she kind of is moving along through the story, I don't want to spoil anything, she hasn't really thought through the other side of that, like what his life is like currently and everything. And I thought you portrayed all that very, very well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I don't think she's oblivious to everything. She's just trying to figure out, where is he? She's dealing with her own guilt over having left him behind. And she has no idea what the circumstances are that he's in right now. She's thinking that maybe he's languishing in the poverty that I managed to escape. And so she has no idea. And so she's just driven by the guilt and also the need to make peace with her past before she can move forward with her husband, but not really thinking that about, who is my child now? And I really don't know this child. And what are the circumstances? He probably has parents. I think that was a thing that, she hadn't really thought much about. And, what does it mean to uproot someone's life when you come back 11 years later? And so, yeah, she learns a lot along the way, and she doesn't really have a plan of action, and she just feels her way through it.
And I guess who has the right to uproot a child's story, and I thought that's a very interesting question when you're dealing with adoption, and who's the one to be able to tell the child. And I just thought all that was very interesting, and I liked the way you portrayed it.
Oh, thank you. And the truth comes out in a pretty dramatic way, as you'll find when you read the book.
So Julie, what about your research?
Yeah, so I had did a lot of science and agriculture research, a lot of forestry research. I wanted to understand specifically what the impact of a rising temperature was on the trees specific to my area, and to, water levels in the area, and this beetle. Like, I went really far down the beetle hole. This tiny beetle, the mountain pine bark beetle, is it's just, this little coffee bean of a beetle, and but it what it does is that when there's a tree is already stressed from drought, it moves in and takes advantage, and it cuts off the resin flow inside the tree. So it basically starves the tree off, and then it leaves it and goes on to the next tree, and then those trees burn. But the thing that I didn't understand about the beetle is that when it burrows in under the bark, and it burrows these little squiggly burrows, I guess, and they're stunning. Like when you peel back the bark and look at the destruction they cause, it's quite shockingly beautiful. It almost looks like writing in a language you can't read in some ways. And I found an artist actually who makes books by taking wood that's been affected by the mountain pine bark beetle and slicing it very thinly. And each page of the book is a slice, so you can see the pattern of the beetle all the way through. And it's absolutely gorgeous. And it made me see the beetle as something, alive and vibrant in an ecosystem, not as a destroyer, that it's not the villain in the story, because this beetle is just being opportunistic like everybody else, like we are. We see a place we want to move into that looks like a great place to raise a family. So we do. And so that's what the beetle does. And it's not a malicious beetle. It's not something to hate. And to me, it made me telescope in very close to the exact nature of this one beetle and the beauty in the destruction it causes. And then to telescope out really far and see how many creatures like this beetle are moving around this planet, us being one of them, and we're no more important or less important than these other creatures moving around. And how it's the other important creature in my book is the Bicknells Thrush, which is a little tiny songbird. It's the title of my book refers to the night song of this bird. And it's also a real bird in the New Hampshire forest. It's this teeny tiny little nondescript gray bird that would fit right in the palm of your hand. And it's not super noticeable. It doesn't do anything dramatic that would make you, think of it or notice it if it wasn't there. But in real life, it migrates south to the Caribbean in the winter, but its habitat there is being destroyed by deforestation and hurricanes, which, so climate issues are killing the bird, and it's not coming back to New Hampshire. So every year we have fewer and fewer of this little tiny bird not returning. And it leaves a hole in our ecosystem. And I loved this idea of how everything that moves in and everything that moves out of an ecosystem changes the whole thing. We shift just a little bit. It might not be noticeable, and maybe not noticeable for years. And maybe we never notice or know what the ramifications of it were, but that I really went deep into the research of these two specific species of the bird and the beetle. And also to other quiet ways that our world is shifting that we don't think about. And it kind of played into a lot of the things that the girls talk about when they're young about. Katie is kind of a naturalist, even as a child, that she's against killing any spiders because you just don't know what could happen if you kill that one spider. Maybe it was meant to do this big grand thing in life. And so she's always trying to protect nature all the time and seeing the potential for ramifications of her actions. And it's almost like a parable within this book is Katie's desire to not destroy a spider. And then the bigger story is about our actions. Even now, like everything we do in some way will have there are ramifications for every choice we make somewhere, and we often never know what they are. Like our choices might wash up on some distant shore and we'll never know it, but it might impact someone in a really profound way. And we might not know that. And so I think the girls as kids think about that. And that all came from the science research, as I kept following one thing leading to the next thing, leading to the next thing in science. And then I kind of turned that into a story about the way our actions just, ripple out away from us. And then in some ways they come back to us sometimes, which is what happens in the story.
Well, that's interesting on the pine beetle. And I think, many Texans head to Colorado in the summer because it's so warm here and the weather is better there. And we've gone to Rocky Mountain. I think this will be our 13th summer. And just to see the devastation from that beetle in it's been the whole time, but definitely the last 5 years, it's significantly worse. So as soon as I saw that your book was about that, I was like, oh, I have to read this because, we've literally just witnessed, tree after tree, pile after pile of all of these just such devastation. So I'll have to try to look at the flip side and like the pine beetle a little bit when I think about its design. But usually I'm just like, oh, it's even worse this next year. So I was very happy to read your story and kind of learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, there's a part in the book where Katie references wanting to take the trees that the pine beetles have destroyed and mill them into floorboards for this home she thinks she's going to build one day, and about how beautiful it would look and feel. And I actually have, my bedroom has floorboards that are milled from spalted wood from a maple tree, not a pine tree, and it's not the same insect, but there's damage to the wood by an invading species, and then you can see the discoloration where the maple tree is fighting back. Like it sends these chemical responses, and you can see it in the wood. And every day I walk on that wood, and it reminds me of these beetles, and it reminds me of how dynamic nature is, because it's always fighting back and trying to rebalance itself. The invader comes in, the maple sends a spike of this chemical in, and for me it's like frozen on my floor, and I can see that every day, which is like, it's pretty exciting, I think.
I love that. Well, what about a highlight? Did either one of you, what would you say the highlight of getting your book published and having it out in the world is?
Yeah, I would say for me, just the acclaim. When you go into it, you have no idea how the book is going to be received. And I spent so much time, not really dreaming of my book making all these most anticipated lists and those kinds of things. But in the beginning, it's like, oh, am I going to write a book that's good enough to get a literary agent? And that was my focus. I was like, oh, if I get that, I'm golden. And then it's about getting the book deal. And, every step of the way, the goal post, it changes, it moves, and you want something more. And even with everything, Julie and I talk about this all the time, that every time we get one thing, it's like we want the next thing. And so I think for me, of course, one highlight has been making the most anticipated list. The Kindest Lie for, on Newsweek and the Oprah magazine and Elle, and, it goes on and on. Being reviewed by the Washington Post and the LA Times, that was huge. I feel like those are just such papers of note, papers of record and prestige, and to have them review The Kindest Lie and write phenomenal reviews of it was definitely a highlight. I'd say another big one, kind of fun one, was being in Entertainment Weekly. And seeing, my face and my book opposite the Foo Fighters. It's really fun. And I'm like, that's something I never imagined would happen for me. And yesterday, Chicago Tribune, featured there. So those kinds of things have just been wonderful. Excuse me. I would say, though, that the biggest thing, outside of those huge things happening, has been the readers that I've been able to connect with along the journey. That part has been the most special, and I didn't anticipate what that would be like. I thought at first it might be, well, oh yeah, I really like your book, but it's been deeper than that. And I've had people send me personal notes about really deeply personal, tragic things that have happened in their lives, and how reading my book has helped transform them and heal them through some difficult times. One woman wrote to me and said that, oh my God, the grandmother, Ruth's grandmother, the character of Mama, is just like my grandmother. And this woman said her grandmother is Jewish and Belgian. And this Mama, Ruth's grandmother is Black. She said, but it's just like my grandmother because she bakes, hot water cornbread, and she keeps a can of bacon drippings on the back of the stove, just like Mama in the book. And so there are just so many ways that people have connected with the story very deeply. And it just shows the universality of story and the commonalities in all of our lives, in spite of this chasm and the things that divide us. And so that part has been the very best part of the journey so far.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. It has to be fun to have people reaching out and saying, your story meant this to me, or changed this for me, or whatever it is. That has to feel very good.
It is. It's very gratifying to know. And I love when they reach out and say so. It's the best, hearing from readers directly.
Good. Well, how about you, Julie?
Yeah, I have almost the same answer. I would say it feels incredible to see your name show up on a Parade magazine or in USA Today and Newsweek, and some of the similar lists. and getting the reviews that you feel like when someone gets you, when someone reviews. There was a review in the Providence Journal recently, and I felt like I want to just go meet this reviewer and just like I need to thank him in person, because I feel like he just got what I wanted someone to get out of my book. So I feel like the acclaim is, like Nancy said, we all along the journey, we never knew what was coming next, and so I didn't anticipate some of those things, which has been really wonderful. But I think for me, I can identify the one moment that I just felt like, oh God, this is great. And it was a few weeks ago. I had a reader, or I think it was a blogger, that had reviewed my book. And I don't read my reviews that often. And I did read this one, and a lot of people have, there have been readers who say that they think I'm being political in my story, and there are political elements of it, and that's just part of the story. But this blogger started out by saying, I don't really like politics. I'm not interested in politics. I don't really pay attention to climate change, and I don't understand climate science. So this doesn't seem like the kind of book I would like. And I'm like, oh God, here it comes. So I brace myself, and then there's a but I really liked the characters. I really liked the story and the nature writing, and I really connected to what these characters are going through. And it made me think about climate change different, and now I care. And that right there was, for me, it's always about plot and character. Like a novel, to work and to find a reader and to connect with a reader, you need to have characters that matter in some way. You have to have a plot that's propulsive enough to keep them invested in the story. So that's always front and center. But having, there's ideas in the book that are really near to my heart. The mountains and woods, lakes of New Hampshire are so special to me. And I want people to care about them, and I want people to care about what happens to them. And so I don't want to be, dogmatic or, didactic in my writing in any way. I want people to fall in love with the characters and the relationship, to care about the friendship between Katie and Daniela. And when they have a falling out, I want my readers to feel, oh, that's so painful, and to root for them to, come back together, and but that it changed somebody, and made them see the world differently. That was, to me, one of the most gratifying moments. And I'd also like kind of to second what Nancy said about hearing from writers, just in general, that, for any readers out there who, if you like a book and you ever think, I should maybe tell that author, I wonder if they'd care. They care about every note, every tweet, every Instagram post, because, we're putting our words and our heart out there and not knowing if anybody cares, if anybody wants to read it, or if it matters, or if they enjoyed it, or if it was an escape for them during a difficult time, or if, like Nancy said, it reminded them of their grandmother. Those things matter so much to us because we write those stories in a vacuum. Like, we're sitting alone, on our computer at home, and knowing that somewhere out there we launched these words out into the world and they landed with someone is a miracle. Like, every time somebody tells me they read my book and it mattered, it just feels like a little tiny miracle. So tell writers if you like their stories, because it really does matter and mean something.
Well, I think what you're saying about the blogger who didn't believe in climate change, or didn't, it wasn't appealing to her, but then she read your story. To me, that's the beauty of fiction. I mean, I think nonfiction obviously serves a purpose, and I'm not at all saying that, but I think fiction can reach people that nonfiction can't. And so you might pick up a book because you'd heard the characters were good, or you like the cover, or whatever it is, and then you may end up completely changing your mind about something after having finished the story. And to me, that's why fiction is so important: the empathy and just all of it, the understanding.
Yeah, so it's been that was been an added and surprising joy in this process for me.
Good. Well, I want to make sure that we get to the questions that people put in the chat, and anybody else that has one, go ahead. But Star asks questions for both of you. What are you currently writing? And then what are you reading?
I can start with that one. So I'm working on something new. I'm about 3 chapters into a new novel. And I can't say much about it yet, except to say that I'm exploring race, class, and family once again. So the themes that readers really came to love and accept and really love and respect in The Kindest Lie, they'll get more of that in the next book. And hopefully you'll learn more about that. So stay tuned on that one. And then I will say I'm always reading something. And I was looking around, like, as I saw that question in the chat, and I was like, oh, I don't have all the books. Usually I keep all the books that I'm reading like near me, or when people ask this question, and I don't have them all near me. But one that I'm reading right now is called Send for Me by Lauren Fox. And yes, I see you're nodding, Cindy, so you've heard of
It's
that one.
Jenna's pick, right? Wasn't one of
It was, yeah, it was Jenna's Today Show pick that, this time about last month. And so it definitely deals with World War II Germany and a family, several generations of a family. That one was really good. Oh, Star is saying Lauren Fox is fantastic. This is my first introduction to Lauren's work, and I'm just loving the book. But other ones that I have read that I definitely recommend that I do have near me, this one, The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. I think Julie is pulling hers out too. And it just released yesterday. So this is one that's really buzzy. Everybody is talking about The Lost Apothecary. And then to add to that, Julie and I are, full confession, are part of an accountability trio with Sarah Penner. So when we were talking earlier about authors, writers supporting each other, Sarah is part of that, and we talk every Sunday just about our journeys to publication and the ups and the downs of what we're going through in the process. But her book is really good. And so I highly recommend The Lost Apothecary. And then just one more that I have with me is The Other Black Girl by Zakiyah Delilah Harris. And this is another one that's coming out. So to put on your radar, it's not coming out until June, I believe. But if you can get your hands on one early, great. If not, definitely buy this when it comes out. It's really good. It's a thriller that's supposed to be a cross between the movie Get Out and The Devil Wears Prada. And so it's about two Black editorial assistants at this publishing house. So it's kind of fun to be in the world of publishing with The Other Black Girl. And this one editorial assistant is like the only Black person there, is excited to have another Black girl show up until it's like, ooh, the other Black girl. And then there ensues the thriller part of this book. But those are a few recommendations.
There's so much buzz about that book already.
Yes, I know. It's on everybody's radar. And so, yeah, I was really fortunate to get an advance copy of it.
Yeah, and I also am working on a second book, and my book is it's called The Last Beekeeper, and it's also in the similar vein of Waiting for the Night Song, that it has a lot of elements of climate change and climate science in the story, with a central relationship that in The Last Beekeeper, the relationship is between a father and a daughter, is the central, primary relationship in the story. And it deals with the plight of our pollinators in agriculture and economic ramifications of what happens if we no longer have pollinators. And that will likely be coming out in early 23. We don't have an exact date, but it'll probably be the first 3 months of 2023. My same publisher, Forge. So I'm really excited about that. I also am a beekeeper. I don't have any active hives right now because they died, which was the inspiration for this book. But as much as you can see me nerding out over the pine beetles, just wait till you see me nerd out over bees. I love bees. I'm obsessed with them, and I love the sound, like the kind of standing in the middle of a hive that's swirling around you. They make this kind of like an om kind of sound, and it's like almost like a trance. And the smells and the humidity inside of a hive and the vibrations of it is like, I'm super excited about this book, and I love writing it because I love pine beetles in a way that's maybe not so obvious, but I think a lot of people can wrap their mind around why I'm in love with honeybees. And so I'm excited to share that one with you in the near future. And as far as reading, I'm also would recommend The Lost Apothecary. It's like Nancy said, Sarah is the third leg in our stool that we meet on Zoom every Sunday to share our debut journeys. And she's wonderful. The book it's such a rich story, and it's really unusual and unique. Well written, so I think you guys would really love that. And another book, I don't have it to show you because it's in the other room, but we were talking about it before the event started, but it's called Depart, Depart. And it's a novella by a debut author named Sim Kern. And it's about a climate disaster in Houston, actually. And it's a fictional disaster, but it's a flood that's catastrophic. And it's about this found family of these flood refugees meeting up at a refugee center after the flood. And they're primarily, the characters are trans, non-binary, and queer characters who are trying to find a place for themselves in this refugee center, and they form a family. So it's about climate, it's about found family and support and identity. And it also has this it has a ghost in it, which is like, I didn't expect that part, but it's a really it's a short book. It's easy to read, but it's something that kind of sticks with you. So I really enjoyed Depart by Sim Kern, and they live in Houston. So maybe that's someone you guys could connect with at your store. And another book that I'm looking at right now is Wild Women in the Blues, which is by a mutual friend of Nancy and I, Denny S. Bryce, and this is coming out in March, at the end of March. Is that right, Nancy? Does it come out the end of March?
It is the end of March, yes.
Yeah, and so I'm actually going to be doing an event in conversation with Denny in April, and it's first of all, I wish you could see the cover up close. I'm obsessed with Denny's cover. Like it's just really detailed, but it's kind of a jazz age dual timeline story. And it's something that you can really get lost in this book, and her writing is great. So I would highly recommend this book as well.
It's why I saw someone asked in the chat the name of it again. It's
I'm
Wild Women
sorry.
in the Blues.
Yeah, Wild Women and the Blues by Denny S. Bryce.
And I think it's out at the March 29th, whatever the last Tuesday of the month.
Yeah, it's at the end of March. It's very good. I also blurbed that book as well. So it's really
you're all over the place. And this book has made a bunch of lists. It was on an Oprah list, and it's been getting a lot of early buzz. And Denny's great. I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with her. She's a friend of mine as well, with a mutual friend. So I love doing author events with people who are friends, but also when I love their book, it makes it really exciting.
Well, good. Well, yeah, I've heard a lot about that one too. Well, we have another question. Melanie, I'm wondering about the author's educational background. What did you study in college and grad school?
Okay. So for me, it's interesting. I did not study creative writing or anything like that. I studied journalism and sociology at Northwestern University. And then I went on to get an MBA at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I did that later in life. But always have been a creative type. And it's interesting that my journalism training, even though I was a journalist many years ago, I think I still bring some of that background to my novel writing. For one thing, it's about being curious about the world, knowing the right questions to ask, digging deeper, figuring out what the details are, knowing that that's what makes a story come alive, that it's in the details. I just remember not only learning this through studying journalism, but being a reporter and actually being a practitioner of it, going to a fire scene, for example, as a reporter. And, most of the journalists are looking at the house that's on fire, or at the fire chief who's giving the press conference. But one thing I learned was to turn my back on the action and look. And when you look behind you, you see the things that other people don't see. And that's what I bring to storytelling too. So when I turn my back on the fire, I might see a little stuffed animal in the rubble, or I might see this diamond ring shining in the ashes. And then I know there's a story behind that stuffed animal or that diamond ring. And so I try to bring that to novel writing, paying attention to those details. So like in my book, it matters that the character of Lena, that's Midnight's grandmother, that she smokes Newports, or that Ruth's brother Eli drinks Bud. Those are details that you may not think matter, but it does. It says something about who they are in the world. And so that's my educational background. Did somebody ask a follow-up question? I feel like I saw something else.
With the background in journalism, do you ever see yourself writing nonfiction?
Oh, interesting. I do see myself possibly doing that. Probably not journalistic style writing, but I could see writing essays, as I care very deeply and passionately about issues of race in particular in America. I would love to emerge as a thought leader possibly in that space, and, write my own thoughts and opinions, maybe a book of essays at some point. But yeah, I could definitely see myself doing some nonfiction, but I would always want to have some of those elements of fiction storytelling in there. So maybe it would be more creative nonfiction, with a more of a narrative focus to it. But I could definitely see doing that if I found the right topic that I was passionate about in the space of race and class in America.
Yeah, as far as my background, I went to college initially as a biochemistry major, but my roommate was a journalism major, and I got obsessed with her homework. And I always was like coming up with ideas for her journalism projects, these ridiculous on-campus stories. And I got so obsessed with it that I decided to get an English credit out of the way. I would take a journalism class, and that was the end of biochemistry. I graduated as a journalism major, a double major of political science and journalism. And I still love science. Obviously, it's something that's always been, a passion of mine. Um, so I don't, and I went on later, just actually in August this year, I just finished a certificate program in sustainable agriculture at Tufts, which was, building on my love of science and agriculture. And I do a lot of self education, I guess, especially when it comes to farming. I had mentioned my farm. The same time that I was writing my book, I also was building a farm. I bought a piece of land that was being timbered, and they were tearing down all these trees where all these animals, bears and moose and deer lived, that it was bordered up against our family home. And I decided the only way to save the land was to come up with a business plan that made sense. And the only thing I think of was being a farmer, and I didn't know how to be a farmer. So I did a lot of research and education on my own, and it's been a hit and miss. I'm not great at all of it, but I'm learning. But I do think that the journalism background, like Nancy said, it's a similar thing. I was a print journalist. Nancy was in TV most of your career, I think, and I was in magazines and newspapers. But I also feel that same. I think that it shows up in my writing. I feel like I have and I've always been a storyteller. Even as a little kid, I used to write fan fiction scripts for TV shows and make my friends act them out. Like, it's always been about story to me. And, the science has been important, but it's always been about telling the story. And the science for me is part of the story. And I do have a master's now in creative writing and literature that I graduated in 2005. And I also did a novel incubator program at Grub Street in Boston, which is just a program where every year they have people submit manuscripts, unpublished books, and they take 10 writers in a year, and we work with an instructor over a grueling year of revising our books. And so I feel like I learned the most about writing in that program, the Grub Street Novel Incubator. So it's a lot of building blocks to get me where I am now, but I think all of them built on each other.
And I would also say that while I didn't study creative writing, I spent a lot of time in writing workshops, some of the same ones that Julie's done. And I mean, there have been so many Eckerd College Writers in Paradise, Tin House, Summer Novel Workshop, Kimbilio Fiction, which was for Black writers, Hurston Wright Foundation, just countless writing organizations, including Grub Street, the Muse in the Marketplace, Writer Unboxed. I mean, I could go on and on. Women's Fiction Writers Association, Mystery Writers of America Midwest Chapter, just all these writing organizations that I've immersed myself in over the years and workshopped elements of my manuscript. And that is all of that, the accumulation of all of that helped me to develop my skills as a fiction writer. And so I don't think you just wake up and do it, without going through the rigor of training in it and being surrounded by other writers. Julie and I both have studied with authors, well-known authors, but I think you learn as much, if not even more, from your classmates in that environment, you reading their work and the things that they have done, where there may have been a plot hole or they haven't deepened characterization enough in their work. You see that, and then you realize, oh, maybe I do the same things in my work. And then you're able to improve your own craft based upon the work that you've done, critiquing other people's writing.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. When I was in the novel incubator, we critiqued each manuscript 3 times over the course of the year, and that's 30 manuscript revisions in a year. So it was a lot of deep diving and a lot of rigor. And I absolutely know that I learned more during that year through my classmates' work than I did, even when I was getting my master's. It was such hands-on, right in front of your face, ability to see something in someone else's writing and learn from the good things they do, and like Nancy said, you can see a reflection of yourself in the things maybe that they're not doing well. And yeah, finding writers communities and writers workshops and groups is so vital. I think that connecting with other writers and sharing your work is such an important part of the process.
Well, great. Well, thank you both so much. This has just been wonderful. I'm just so happy to have you both here and hear more about your books and see everybody else's faces. It's very nice. So Krista, do you want to get a photo before? I don't know.
Yeah, if those of you that want to be a part of it, if you want to put yourself visible, and if you have a book and you'd like to hold it up, this will be the first time I actually have it where it's not backwards.
All right, hang on, and get Nancy's here too.
Yeah, we can give us a minute and everybody get situated. And
and I'm going to ask for a second if you just hold off on the chats, because I always end up having a chat in the bottom. Okay. All right, everyone. Whenever you're ready to smile, we'll take a couple. Excellent.
well, thank you, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. Thanks for joining us.
And we're looking
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you back in the future soon, hopefully in person.
Yes,
You can-
exactly.
You can
Bye.
count on us coming.
Yes, we will be there.
We'll get one with the four of us real quick. And
Bye, everybody.
bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks for coming.